All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'm TJ Pache with Ready for Tuesday, and I'm very, very happy that you're here with us. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping notes. We will have time toward the end for audience questions. Please use the Q&A feature as we go to submit those. Today's conversation is recorded and it will be posted to YouTube for your viewing pleasure or the viewing pleasure of your colleagues afterward. Today's webinar is focused on where things stand in election administration as we move through the 2026 election cycle. As we just mentioned, we are already in the throes of the 2026 election cycle, and election administrators across the country have a lot on their plates. Workforce challenges, the everyday realities of keeping elections running well. Those are what they're facing. Today's conversation is meant to be candid and practical. We're going to spend time on the wins worth recognizing, talk about the persistent pain points that continue to make the work of election administration difficult, and the challenges and opportunities that are still taking shape. I think it's easy to recognize that many things are going well, but many things remain difficult and uncertain for our colleagues in election administration. But we're looking forward to this conversation. Today, I am joined by a very terrific panel of friends and colleagues from different organizations that support election administration. I'm looking forward to hearing all of their perspectives. But before we jump into their perspectives to get us started, I'm going to have everybody give us a bit of an introduction to themselves, and then we'll go ahead with the questions. And we're going to start with Bonnie from the elections group. Bonnie.
Hi, folks. It's really good to be with everyone today. I am new staff to the elections group, but not new to elections. Worked in elections in Wisconsin for nearly 15 years. But it's great to chat with everyone today.
Excellent. Whitney.
Hey, Whitney Quisenberry from the Center for Civic Design. In some ways, we're the election outsiders because we're not a group of election administrators, but I think I've got 25 years in, so I think that gives me some standing. We try to solve the down in the weeds implementation problems that get between voters and policy.
All right, amazing. Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Lund. I'm a technical product manager at US Digital Response. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit that connects a volunteer base of over 12,000 hand raisers with all sorts of expertises with election offices to help them solve complex challenges and get things done.
Spencer.
Good afternoon. Spencer Wood from the Election Security Exchange. So we're one of the new kids on the block where we help election officials around physical, cyber, and operational security, helping them manage those risks.
Amazing, amazing. And last but not least, but only because he signs my check, Noah Prates.
But first, then, TJ, I'll put that in the ledger book for you. My name's Noah Prates. I am president of Ready for Tuesday, maybe we're the new kids on the block, a spin-off organization from the elections group focused on increasing readiness and supporting all the other organizations who support election officials. So can't wait to have this conversation.
Amazing, amazing. Well, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna jump right in. There is no ordering for this. All I ask and all that the attendees ask is everybody not speak at once. So our first question is, from where your organization sits, based on the work that you do, the work that you're engaged with, what feels most important to understand about election administration in 2026? Noah,
All right,
why don't you go first? You go first, Noah, because you went last.
I'll hop in. Yeah. Thank you. I've been in this, Whitney at 26. I got 27 now in this, and it feels like there's a new challenge every year, and we get a little foreshadowing of what's coming. And so we would think, oh, we got to be ready for Russia and cyber, right? Or ready for healthcare, ready for more mail. And this year just feels like ready for anything. There's so much volatility across the field, the legal and regulatory environment. maps changing, potential major process changes with a calendar that's shortening every second. So it's ready for everything, ready for anything, ready for everything. But I'm actually really excited about our potential to get it right because we've just got so much practice over the last 7 years at getting ready.
Yeah, I
Amazing.
remember. I remember in 2020, people would say, "Well, what's your plan for this year? What's your strategy?" And I'd say it's to be ready, and then be like, "Ready for what?" And I said, "More things than I hope will happen." So that was fun. I really do think that um, the thing that I'm really noticing this year is how it's been going on for a while, but how accelerated, like misinformation happens fast and fixing it happens slowly. Both in the general, takes, time for lies, for truth to catch up with lies, but also just that fixing it means stopping and thinking about procedures and thinking about materials and making changes and testing those changes and writing new procedures. And so it's really, I feel like we're sort of on a treadmill running, waiting for something to happen all the time.
Yeah, and I would add to that volume and to kind of tag onto that. I don't think this is unique to our organization, but from my perspective, everything is a trust issue now. And we saw a promising bump in election trust after the November 2024 presidential, but just trust is growing really quickly again in 2026, according to the polls, and that affects what work gets done, how it gets done, with whom you collaborate and how you collaborate with other election officials. It raises the stakes on even the smallest missteps, even if they're inconsequential. So that just has really pervasive effects, that trust issue.
Bonnie,
Yeah, I just want to uplift what everyone has said. Um, what I keep coming back to is the sheer pace of change and the volume of this change and how it's unevenly landing across the field. Some offices are navigating with changing legislation every week, new technology requirements, increased public scrutiny at the exact same time with the staff that they've always had, and or in some cases fewer staff, newer staff, and a lot less funding. And we know that those funding challenges are going to continue in the next couple of budget cycles. I think what doesn't get fully appreciated from the outside is how much cognitive and operational load that creates with staff and administrators. So it's not just that these challenges are building and building and building, it's that they're arriving all at the same time, and administrators are expected to absorb all of these changes without dropping any of the ones that are already on their plate. And so what the elections group is doing is we're tracking closely all of these effects and the pressures in the workforce and institution, and how do we protect all of that cumulative knowledge and really help uplift and support morale. And the way that a lot of these partners are able to do that is provide a lot of the resources so people can still succeed even under all of these challenges. And that's sort of been a really rewarding part about this partnership.
Spencer, I see you agreeing enthusiastically.
I agree with everything that all the other panelists said. And of course, they're all amazing and they did a wonderful job. I do also want to kind of toss in a glimmer of hope as well. Election professionals are some of the most resilient planners I have ever met. While I didn't grow up in elections, I did grow up in state and local government and kind of bounced around with different agencies and stuff. And I can tell you, there are not a lot of professionals who can deal with all the issues that were talked about on a fixed deadline and deliver every single time. I mean, that is truly amazing. I can't tell you how many other places I would be at and people are like, we're just going to move the deadline. We'll just move the deadline. We'll move the deadline in 6 months. There are no
Well,
moving
you did
deadlines
do
in
that,
elections.
to be fair, in Ohio a few years back there, Spencer.
There was one, yes, there was one, but with the
And
exception of that one. But I mean, but administration officials across the country do amazing work, and they are amazing planners. And I think we're lucky to have them all.
Louisiana.
Yeah, another one,
Yeah.
another one.
Yeah.
Well,
Can I add though, TJ, real fast, is what I would have loved when I was running elections up until like 2019 was this sort of ecosystem of organizations like these. Now, CCD was around, and actually they helped redesign all of our materials, and I realized how much better we got just by our workers being able to interface with it. But we're in a place today where if somebody calls and is like, I got this new thing and I'm not quite sure how to manage the change and do the deep dive, I'm going to say, hey, call Jen at TAG. Well, I got a technology problem. There's got to be a way to do this efficiently. Hey, let's get on the phone with Steve, right? Or my workers are really frustrated because they're not making sense of our materials. Well, democracy is a design problem. Here's Whitney's phone number. When it comes to cybersecurity in particular, I'm going to send them over to the exchange because that remains a big thing. So we've just got an amazing ecosystem for election officials to rely on when people want to raise awareness or build partnerships or test their own processes. I'm going to say, hey, call us. Let us come exercise that. And so I think election officials should feel real confident that we're all going to be able to pass off to each other requests that come in. And that's just a good place to be.
Absolutely. Well, I think Spencer's note about the resilience of election officials and election administrators is an excellent segue because we don't want this conversation to be doom and gloom. We'll talk about the pain points and the woes. But as you look across the field of election administration, what are some of the real successes that you're seeing happening at the different levels of offices, whether it be local offices or state offices? What's exciting you within your areas of expertise?
Well, I can start with this one, TJ. I think what I'm seeing, and I know a lot of the professionals on the call here today have seen it as well, election officials are pivoting to a all hazards approach where they're building election security working groups, building those relationships with their emergency managers, with their law enforcement partners, with fire and safety, with other groups in their community to again really do that all hazards approach. So I think Whitney mentioned this, planning for anything, and that's what they're doing. They're doing a really good job with that approach right now.
Excellent. Whitney, anything to add there?
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of things. One is that every time we have an election date or a special election and it just goes smoothly, I think that's one of those quiet wins. It doesn't get much notice, but cumulatively they start to add up, right? I mean, we were helping monitor the Virginia special election, and it was a pretty boring day, and that's a win, right? That's a really big win when you're someone who's there to help solve problems. I think the other thing is that this ecosystem of people who are adjacent to elections, that is, with a good experience in elections, are learning how to work together better so we can move things faster between us. And I think that's a real win. The other thing for me is we started getting calls early in 2025 or early in 2020, late in 2025 and early in 2026 for people who wanted to do something. We were like, for this year, and they're like, no, this is getting ready for 2027. So we're already seeing, I think election's a cycle, and you're on that hamster wheel, and you just keep, getting from one election to another. And maybe it's that it's so obvious that we have to get ahead of things, and maybe it's that there's so many special elections that we've sort of broken the hamster wheel a little bit. But people are beginning to say, okay, where do I want to be before the general this year, and starting to think about that in December when they do their debriefs, and where do I want to be next year? And we have to fix this form because there's going to be a legislative change, but we then want to bring all our other forms up to that standard, or we want to update our poll worker manual because it's ballooned to 300 pages, and it's just the accumulation over time. And how do we get that back down to the quick operational information that poll workers need on the day of elections?
Noah, anything?
I do want to just layer in something that excites me a lot is having done this for a long time. I remember maybe 2005 or a little later, like looking at the election performance index put out by Pew at the time, and then saying, hey, you know what? While they're measuring it in Illinois, we can actually use these for measures for our own success, and as a market mover inside of the state of Illinois, Cook County being, nearly half of the place, we could, get residual benefit to our colleagues. But that we made that up in some ways. We took their measures and then made performance goals. But over the last 5 years, the U.S. Alliance for Election Excellence with a bunch of cohorts, and some of us like on this call collaborated on it. So actually built standards and substandards, something that we can all attach our work to externally, but election officials actually now have a North Star to drive towards. And I'm seeing real progress, like slowly, and then people who are already doing good things are folding it into that model. And I'm super excited for our profession and our field to actually have a consistent thing to measure across the states.
Yeah, I also wanted to celebrate the U.S. Alliance for Election Excellence, the launch of that certification program for offices, not just individuals, kind of a new set of standards there. And also their continued support for, being a venue where they can bring different offices together from across the country
Yeah.
to learn from each other, to share best practices, to commiserate and collaborate. Yeah, that's just special and unfortunately rare.
Bonnie.
Yeah.
Oh, Whitney, sorry.
No, go ahead, Bonnie.
Oh, yeah. Having only been out of an elections office for maybe 3 weeks now, I want to really uplift the incredible ecosystem that folks have been talking about with the Alliance. With this past semester, the flagship university at UW, the office did an incredible collaboration with one of the design professors there and created introductory undergraduate, but it was mixed with some grad students course of how do you actually operationalize human-based civic design. So you had a lot of students that came from across the entire state for their first time survey an early voting site for the primary and then created materials that were actually relevant for first-time voters for the April election. And that came from these incredible partnerships, that came from a lot of folks from TCD joining in, that came from just connections that the office had made throughout the network that was able to talk to the Ann Arbor clerk and her collaboration with the University of Michigan design folks, and then tagging in other folks from the Alliance. And so the way that we all succeed is that rising tide, that we are all helping each other out, that it is a completely nonpartisan initiative to really start to meaningfully and intentionally support elections offices to be as Noah said, to start to meet and certify those standards in the Alliance as this sort of celebratory event. And that's an incredibly positive goal to work towards.
Yeah, I want to tie what Noah said and Bonnie said together because I've been a real fan of the Election Performance Index. I mean, it's basically the eaves put into a form you can read, and it creates a little bit of a league table, which gets a little competition going, which is always good, as long as it's not, oppressive. But if you look at the early eaves, everything's kind of got a natural curve, right? A few people in the middle and a few people at the two ends, or I guess it would go this way, right? But when you look at this year's, the one they just released, everybody has gotten squashed to the middle. Like you get a couple of trailers on one end who are not doing so well, and a couple trailers at the other end who are doing really well. But most of the people are within a fraction of a percentage point of each other, and that is an incredible sign of progress.
I was thinking a lot about the sort of leaders and laggers and the just that's a natural thing, right? The sort of bell curve, but everything is changing so fast right now. I look at like Ohio and Florida, who years ago created these certification programs for their election officials. They created infrastructure so that they, the great stuff that you do, Whitney, or that Tech builds, or the products that you bring forth, USDR, can be plunked in through these educational and these certification programs. But now there's just a blitz in that area, recognizing this is a profession. We need to equip the workforce with more stuff. Tag, I'm really proud of the work y'all do as you're real leaders in this space. It's, not only creating your own sort of education free to everybody, but also supporting state associations. So I think this is another great place, following the innovations of places like Ohio. And if I ever say that again, like,
Amazing. Noah, a word you used, profession. And I think for many folks who work in elections, the idea that they are in a profession or that they are part of a larger profession might be something that maybe 10 or 20 years ago they didn't think about that in the same way. And maybe they did, but as we do work across the country, I see a growing recognition within people that they're part of a profession. What does that mean today in 2026 as folks are getting prepared and as folks are doing the necessary work of allowing or getting ready for voters to come and participate?
I'll just drop a note that um, we need to share. Increasingly, we recognize the need to share a common language, right? In the past, we could live in our own little county ecosystem, call the same job something different than all of our neighbors. But to the extent that we live in an information environment where, like, broad brush strokes are cast against the profession, and we're forced to respond not just for ourselves, but for our colleagues, and for the entire country. The ability to translate terms across jurisdictions and start to use a common language is increasingly important. And sharing a common baseline is all signs of a profession. Sharing a common understanding. And the cap on the profession side is really having a shared set of standards that we develop. So between the alliance and the just need in our profession to be able to communicate clearly across county lines is really the hallmark of this as a solid profession.
Anything resonate with folks there, Bonnie? Maybe as our most recent active election administrator?
I would say, yeah, I think one of the biggest and most persistent gaps that we keep seeing is workforce. And what does workforce actually mean? Because it can sound very, very abstract. And what we're actually talking about is we keep seeing massive turnover in the field, right? We see experienced administrators reaching that burnout point, leaving, and then taking decades of that on the ground experience with them. And there's not being there for a long time, there's not been it seen as a profession that has a pipeline, that has these support structures and infrastructures to replace, and then have those procedures written down, that there are SOPs even available. And what TAG has been working on, as Noah said previously, so TAG has been working with state associations on building workforce development, building those training modules, and the collaborative efforts with the Bipartisan Policy Center and the Election Technology Trust Initiative is to think more systematically about this. So so we know that this is an issue. What is the better way that we can really start to support at a macro level all of these different states so that the entire field stays afloat? And so there's really good work happening in these places, and it's not quite evenly distributed, but as Whitney said on that index, it is rising. It's not that there is a bell curve, but on the whole, that average is rising, which is really, really positive.
Absolutely, absolutely. Whitney?
I had this insight earlier this year. I don't know why it took me 20 years to get here, but that we sort of got into this for the voters and then realized, of course, that you have to work with the people who create the environment. And that was how we kind of got into election administration. But it took me a moment to realize I was listing for somebody a bunch of the kinds of problems we solved, and that every one of them, everything that was a problem for voters also was a problem within election administration. And that really beginning to see those two sides of that mirror. That, if you have a law that creates a lot of provisional voters, that creates workload for the election office. And if it's not clear, we had election officials in Ohio tell us that they had voters showing up clutching their voter ID because they were afraid they should be bringing theirs in. And that meant that somebody had to take 5 minutes or a couple of seconds saying, no, you don't, you can leave, and talk them down off the cliff from being mad. So I think beginning to think about this as a systemic problem, where if we ask people to fill in something weird on an absentee ballot form, we better explain to them why they're doing it. or else they're going to not. And now we have voters, and it all just it increases mistrust, and it doesn't stay within your office. And then the common language one, way back when California was working on the Voters' Choice Act, we were working on language access, and we looked around the state, and I think we found 5 different translations of Voters' Choice Act into Spanish, because of course each county was doing their own translation. And it is hard to set up statewide committees. It is hard to set up, ways to do that together. But in a world where there are no longer media markets, every time we have one of those little differences, 2 groups of people get confused. Voters who are less frequent voters just worry, is this the same thing, right? It's got the same word, different words. Does that mean the same thing? And voters who pay a lot of attention to elections start looking at those nuances. So you get the election office sort of gets slammed between these 2 extremes, the really avid voters and the less engaged voters, both having trouble with something because they don't know the language we're talking.
All right, all right. Well, let's move a little bit more intentionally to the pain points, as we're going to call them, the woes, and how your organizations are trying to help the field navigate those. I want to start with the election security exchange with Spencer, because I think what you all are doing is quite remarkable. But kind of within that realm of election security, I gave you a big realm, Spencer. What's one persistent pain point that you're trying to address or that you're working to address?
So I think the biggest pain point that we're trying to address, and as a recovering technologist, which is the best way to describe it. And I used to work at CISA as one of the election security advisors. Um, we were the worst at putting out plain language text or plain language stuff about what can an election official actually do about this really bad problem. So what the Election Security Exchange is specifically built to address is to take complex security guidance, translate it into 2 different things. First of all, let's make it plain English. Because if we have to explain it too much, then we're not doing our job right. So make sure it is in plain English so every election official can understand. And then also offer practical solutions that a lot of election officials actually implement to mitigate or to solve that risk. So it's things like our First Things First series or Building Election Security Working Group, where we want to break things down into bite, snacks, and meals. Where a bite product is something where it's
Hey,
literally
that was
like an
for
election
you.
official. Yep, you take a bite real quick, as you're moving between, stuff on election day. A snack is when you have 5 minutes to sit down and eat a bag of popcorn. And a meal is when you have an entire bowl of popcorn and you're just sitting there eating your emotions as you eat that entire bowl of popcorn.
Remarkable. Steve, I guess you are not yet a recovering technologist. Do you have anything to add in response there?
No, still very much knee deep in it. So yeah, I think, in terms of like persistent pain points, election officials are always short on time. There's always another election coming up. That doesn't change. Voter communication and education, a perennial concern. That doesn't change. In fact, it may be more important this year than ever. But I think where I've seen our role at US Digital Response and really trying to help, not just with the digital side of things, but with the expectation that election officials have to be an expert in just about everything, like logistics, technology, training and adult education and hiring, PR and comms, research, cybersecurity, like the list goes on of what you need to do. So I think, trying to build tools, but also connect with other experts in different fields, to build those skill sets, to build capacity, to leave election officials more capable than we left them. That's really where we try and approach. And I think that is just part of an election official's job, for better or worse.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. I've been in the passenger seat. Steve is driving to follow along with a project that USDR is leading on, and I have been continuously impressed by the value that the volunteers who have different skill sets. It's not just folks who are specifically technologists recovering or otherwise, but I've been very impressed with the experience. Whitney, Bonnie, Noah, anything here?
I was going to say we're hitting a moment when we're realizing that design too is a geeky thing, right? That anybody who's really deep in a particular skill area, um, at first, you're talking to a small number of people, and it's okay. You have a lot of time to translate. But when you're talking, as your audience gets bigger, you really have to think about how you're talking to them and how you're giving them, not just the words they can understand, but words that maybe the election director has to take to their county clerk, right? Or to their state office and to be able to do it. And I think we're shifting to really think about not just delivering a thing, but a toolkit around it that includes why, explains bite snack meals, explains an approach to communications, so that they can carry that work forward and not just be guessing, oh, I don't know why they put this here. Let's just move it away. And maybe there was a real intention behind it. Um, and getting better at their skills internally, because we are seeing election offices starting to make sure that there's someone on their staff who's better at communications materials, someone on their staff who's better at technology and cybersecurity. So, because all of those skills are needed. Um, so that it's sort of the pain point is I want to be like you. I want to know what you know, Steve. I want to know what you know, Spencer. I want to know what you know, Bonnie, but I don't. How do I get there? And I think creating the pathways that help people figure out what they need today, not to be, a designer who can go get hired by a Madison Avenue company, but a designer who can do the work you need to do inside your office.
Absolutely. Noah, Bonnie?
I would say going into 2026, I think comms, maintaining trust is still a significant pain point. But really, with the Alliance partners, and with TEG, TEG has a tremendous learning library. There are comms materials. When you are in a under-resourced and understaffed office, you don't always have the time, as Whitney said, to make sure that your language access is is accessible, to make sure that you're meeting all the ADA requirements, but that there are so many resources within the entire Alliance ecosystem that all of these partners are able to regularly provide and happily provide and support, that you don't have to come up with your social media and comms plans from scratch. There are templates, there are Excel spreadsheets that you just put in your election day, minus however many dates that you have these statutory deadlines, that as much as it's on your plate, a lot of these partners can help process that overload and make sure that things still run smoothly and that voters get the information that they need to maintain that trust in this current environment.
Absolutely.
Appreciate the sort of public-facing comms campaign. These are maybe I'm kicking an analogy to death, but the little bites that go out for the broad public. But, our voters and increasingly like our observers sort of deserve the snack and the meal. I mean, elections are increasingly complex. In my day, we would ship all of our mail ballots to 2,500 precincts to be counted on election day. There, the observer could cross off every name and count every ballot. It adds up at the end of the night, and they're done. That wasn't good enough to provide access to people. And so we made a lot of what I think are very good changes, but that added a lot of complexity. Observers deserve like documentation sets that make sense. They need to know how to tie things together. When we invest in that, both from a communication standpoint, like Whitney's issue, but also in the amount of time we devote to our observers, it actually does reduce tensions broadly, right? Not obviating, but lessening the need for amazing broad public comms campaigns. So to me, we have a tremendous burden right now to communicate to the skeptical, to the observer who doesn't trust us. If we get that right, a lot of the other stuff takes care of itself.
Absolutely. And we've talked about how you all are addressing, or the work that you're doing is addressing some of these things, but taking yourself out of whatever area that you truly have expertise in. As we look at emerging issues across the field, so not necessarily things that we need to worry about for tomorrow or for 2026, what are some of those big emerging issues that you're thinking about or that your organization is thinking about?
I'll jump in and start. And I think it's not just the exchange thinking about this. I think we are all thinking about this. So let's be clear. Um, it's AI and how AI is going to dramatically shift the landscape in lots of ways. There's going to be lots of amazing benefits with the technology, but yet there are going to be some disadvantages to that and then technology. So luckily we have people with they're not able to be here today, but like the Arizona State University AI clinic, which I know TJ you're a big part of, and Noah. But luckily we have those resources available for election officials. But even at the exchange, it's like, what's the security aspects when it comes to AI, and how do election officials need to prepare for it? Because AI isn't changing the risk, other than it is changing the volume of the things that are coming in from a security point of view.
All right. What else? Nobody else can say AI. Talk about AI.
All right, I'll just go right back on mute then.
I was going to say we're certainly not going to say AI. I think in some ways we're never going to be the leading edge of technology at CCD, right? But we've been thinking about some of the long-term changes that are changing sort of some fundamental election procedures. So, for instance, we worked with everybody wants more information about the process of an election, and a lot of people do that by putting out a spreadsheet. It's a nice thing. All the data's there, but it doesn't tell the story. So we've been thinking about how do you make a transparent election information dashboard that not only gives the people who are just looking for data, the data, but also tells the story about why that data looks like it is. Like, why did a county report that they had about 350,000 ballots left to count, right? 350,000 ballots left to count. It sounds very imprecise, but there's a reason for that. The other is things like list maintenance, which I think is getting both more complex, but also in some ways simpler because more people are coming through the DMVs. And that's going to mean thinking that's a project we're working on this year under an MIT grant. And thinking about if we're going to mail postcards or letters to people and say, are you still alive? Stand up and say so. How do we make sure that we get a good response from that? Not just the letters that get returned because they've moved, but that encourages people to rethink, hey, I am registered to vote, or maybe I need to update something, and get that live response too. And the other thing that for us is really on the forefront, because it's going to change so many things about procedures, is we're in the middle of seeing a lot of experimentation with additional identification requirements, and some of those are going to work well, and some of those procedures are going to work badly, and it's going to depend on how the rules are written and how the laws are written, and trying to get ahead of understanding some of that so that when a state decides they want to change those requirements, that's a policy question. That's a different thing than implementation, but that they design a policy that can be implemented practically. So, and then that shows up in your provisionals, which used to be a sleepy little area, but it's been, we didn't used to see provisionals in headlines. So thinking about all of that, thinking about how to bridge the gap between that moment when something happens and what's the bite you can get out the door while you're still thinking what's actually going on. How do you acknowledge that you're present in the problem before you have to really work on it? And that's something we're working on this year, as thinking about, we're calling it when something happens. So we're ready for Tuesday, but when something happens, um, you're ready to be able to then take the careful steps that Election Security Exchange would advise, and be able to work your communication plan with maybe that 1 hour head start.
Absolutely. Steve, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. I want to hear what you have to say about AI.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, over the last year, I really do feel like we all saw a change. I mean, the shift from election officials seeing AI and understanding it only as a potential threat factor. Like, how does this enable new threats, or how does this enhance existing threats, to how can I use this? What can it do for me? So, it's like a kitchen knife. You want it to be sharp so you can work faster and get better results. But if you're not careful, you can lop your whole finger off. So I think, we're in the short term developing training workshops on AI, like, how to level up your poll worker training with it. We completed our first engagement in creating an AI translation assistant in Doña Ana County, New Mexico. Keeps humans in the loop, but provides faster, better results for translating and meeting VRA requirements, for example. But I think if you're asking us to zoom out, like in the long term, I think there's like two things that makes me think of. On the AI front, I think like 10 years into the future, like what happens if AI is and large language models and these platforms are the main way in which voters are getting their information? How do you communicate with voters when there's this layer of indirection between them? And what does that mean for your systems and your communication? That's a big question. Or like when agents are trying to register to vote or track mail ballots and interact with online services instead of the humans themselves. That's a really interesting and wide open question. I think the other thing that we haven't talked about yet that's like a big question that I think has a lot of uncertainty behind it is mail ballots and the postal service. What is the postal service going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years? What is mail ballot legislation going to look like? How does that affect the way that election officials run their elections? Is also a big, murky question.
That's yeah. All right, Noah, Bonnie, what you thinking about? What's keeping you up?
It's a continuing challenge. I think of like there was this old Siskel and Ebert show, right? These critics that would like watch a bit of a movie and then just pick it apart. And um, increasingly, I feel like we're all election officials are in a little movie, and that means like the theater or the performance of their work, um, the requirements to like just always be on, to be as organized as can be. Um, to be eminently understandable to the most skeptical makes a tremendous amount of difference. I mean, I remember seeing TV from 2020 and in certain counties, like they had little vests on depending on where, and it just really settled. That was great. It was a great performance, which also meant there was great execution, right? Like the time spent on this is really a long way of getting to Whitney's point. They were telling a story. It was viewable to the people sort of in the room. The paperwork was viewable, but it was viewable to the people simulcast worldwide, right? And we have to sort of recognize increasingly we're in a bubble. We need to tell the story. We need to provide context to all that raw data, including film and like movement footage and vans bringing ballots from one location to another. This is all part of the process, but we got to add the context to it. I think that challenge is just going to it's going to remain high forever. And I continue to, that's where my worry continues to be. Are we telling the story about this in a way that people can understand?
Bonnie, anything here?
I would say training and that structural gap that is so lacking underneath it. It sounds wonky, but it is the foundational one. So like from those people, like who are your poll workers, who are maintaining the polling places, who try to make sure that folks get their correct ballots, make sure that the polling place is open at the right time. And then use your middle manager, like, do they understand those new chain of custody laws that might be coming through? Do they understand any of those precinct changes and any of those boundary changes? And then is that able to then, from the leadership level, is that being communicated in a accessible way to the public, to stakeholders in the community, and to any of the folks who might really be questioning the integrity of things? So then how do you make sure that from the folks on the ground all the way up to leadership have those resources, that they do have those trainings that are as timely as possible with all of these legislation changes, with all of these legal challenges, to make sure that at the day that they are fully prepared and feel comfortable answering those questions, making sure that they're supporting one another and building that cohesive teamwork and culture of accessibility and transparency.
Excellent, excellent. I do encourage folks, if you're tuning in, please ask questions using the Q&A function. I've got two more kind of lightning round, closing round questions for our panelists, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A, assuming we have time. What is one resource, practice, mindset? Whitney, your team at CCD introduced me to the idea of mindset, skill set, tool set, which I love in the same way that Noah loves bite snack meal. But what is one mindset or skill set or tool set that you hope folks take away from this conversation in your organization's work after today's conversation?
I would say that if you look at our toolkit, civic design/tools, that we don't let anything go up on that list until it's been used in an election office. So we're both designers and researchers. We're bringing in a depth of experience in making the thing in the first place, but we're also making sure that it's been field tested, and that the recommendations we make are evidence-based, both research evidence and practical evidence.
Spencer, Noah, Bonnie, Steve, mindset, skill set, tool set.
So I think probably the biggest thing is just for election officials to know that you're not going at it alone. You have not only, all of us on the call here to help support you, you also have members of your community, like Building Election Security Working Group and things like that. And I'm going to steal a Matt Masterson line because, everything is Ohio. So let's bring it back home with Masterson there. But realistically, something he would say all the time is a call to one is a call to all. So, if you got a question, reach out to one of us and we'll figure out the best person to help support you. And it might be a few of us.
Noah, Bonnie, Steve.
Yeah, I'll say at US Digital Response. So all our projects start with a conversation, usually just like a half-hour call or like something passing at like election center or something, just like, hey, I've got this idea. So we're not building products out of the ether or trying to like bring technology in where it doesn't fit. We're trying to figure out how do we solve the problems that you have. How do we help you get things done that you wouldn't otherwise. And we've just got so many talented people in our network who have the same sense of duty and service that you do. They want to volunteer their time. They want to help you succeed. And usually it just starts with a quick call. It's just like, so I've got this idea. So yeah, please bring me your ideas.
Totally. Throw up the bat signal, right? To any of us and we capture it. And if we're not the one to do it, we're going to share with our colleagues. I guess I would say like there's an entire ecosystem trying to pick up demand signals from the field and like be responsive. And so, a lot of us organizations will publish guides and documents or build tools or build technology. On our website, we've tried to catalog all those. I think TJ putting it up, and we've aligned each of them to alliance standards, right? So all the stuff that the elections group put up, or that the exchange put up, or the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, cataloged in a single place with an organizational schema, so that you can get to it. CCD's materials. So when the bat signal goes out, one of us is going to grab it and like to try to be responsive. Unfortunately for you all, the hard work of making it real in your jurisdiction is still on you, for the most part. But we've recognized that over time, given a little bit of extra effort, that the guides and the materials we build make it a lot easier for you to get from the thought that you talked to Steve about to implementation in your shop. So send up the bat signal and then be willing to do the hard work and make it real in your shop.
Bonnie?
I think to recognize that all of us have folks on our teams who have run elections, that we've sat in the places you've sat in, that we know what it feels like to be responsible for something that matters this much. And so that understanding that, yes, like maybe I'm not going to be the best of designing a form that's completely accessible, but I know I can tag in Whitney's crew. And that if there's security things, I'm absolutely going to ask Noah and Spencer to tag in on any of those issues. And if there's any technology or data sets that need to be created, tag in Steve and his folks. That all of us intentionally design resources that are actually useful in the field. These are not just theoretical white papers that are being put online. That TAG has an incredible library of resources for something as simple, but not simple in practice, of like ballot reconciliation, right? Making sure the ballots that you got in are the ones that are counted and counted timely. And so making sure that the elections can function as smoothly as possible. We're all so deeply invested in making sure that the field and the folks that staff all of these offices succeed.
Amazing, amazing. I see a couple questions in the Q&A, so maybe I'll come back to my last lightning round question. But one here is, well, actually, Bonnie, one of your former colleagues in Wisconsin, says, Bonnie is fantastic. It's fantastic in all capital letters. I +1 that. So great to see you thriving in providing your thoughtful and professional insights. Just to embarrass you a little bit here. Very good. But I've got a question here. What current demand gaps are there in election administration? I might turn this one to Noah. Noah, I know you've kind of I know we have collectively thought about the alliance standards and identifying gaps through that. So what are we seeing kind of generally for the field in terms of gaps?
Well, I mean, this is easy in some ways because resourcing continues to be the largest constraint for election officials. And there are efforts in every state house and in the federal government to expand the amount of resourcing that goes down to election officials. The good news is that to the extent those resources come, there are now great places to put them. They go to meet particularized national standards that are agreed upon by the members of the profession, by you all. But that's going to continue to be the biggest gap is resourcing. And it manifests as space, it manifests as time, it manifests as training, professional development. All of these things are necessary investments to get the observers and the voters the election they deserve, right? Making complex understandable isn't cheap. It's certainly not free, right? Our observers and our voters sort of deserve elections they can understand. That comes only with investment, not magic.
Amazing, amazing. I've got another one here. Any ideas on how to get additional resources or grants to help enhance the profession and resources directly for election administrators? Maybe, Bonnie, I'll prompt you a little bit. I know you all do excellent work alongside the Bipartisan Policy Center on this front. Any quick notes about that program and that work?
I think it's important to really start to build, BPC does incredible work with the legislatures to try to really highlight election offices' voices, because a lot of times the legislators are going to make bills. They don't always tap in the subject matter experts, as all of you are, to really make sure that those bills are meaningful, that those fiscal packages attached to those bills actually provide the resources that folks need on the ground. If there's a technology bill that goes through, does it actually robustly meet the needs of the IT departments at the Secretary of State's office? And making sure that you have those connections. I know there was just a Election Administrators Advocacy Day at Washington, D.C. last week, and that was a huge group of election administrators going to Capitol Hill and saying the funding was not enough, and that it's really important, if you want elections to succeed, to make sure that they have the resources to actually meet those demands. If you still write bills that are not actually incorporating the voice of the people impacted, then they're still going to have those missing gaps. And it's so important to be in those spaces of advocacy to make sure that the legislation is resonant and helpful.
Amazing. All right, I've got my last question, and then we will close out. In one sentence, Noah, one sentence. In one sentence, What gives you hope about the state of election administration right now?
I think he was going to me first.
You
I
can
need
go
time
first,
to.
Noah, but one
I don't
sentence.
know I don't know how to put a paragraph into a sentence instantly. Like if somebody else has it, an answer. All right, what gives me hope, honestly, is that election officials, members of the profession, are the ones doing it.
All right, very good. One sentence. Come on, everybody. We need
Yeah,
hope.
same. Election officials continue to amaze me. I wish you could have a more average day more often, but you're amazing all the time. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say election officials are awesome. So that's what gives me hope.
I'll do a plus one. And I was reading a story about a legislative adventure in a state today, and there was a quote from a legislator that said, "We have to remind ourselves that it's our job to help people to vote." And the quote was, "Aren't we here to make sure every vote counts?" And that we're starting to hear that come from people across the political spectrum.
Bonnie, our closing out single sentence. You can have as many sentences as you want, Bonnie.
Yeah, because
No
you're
pressure.
fantastic.
You're fantastic.
Oh, that was so kind and unexpected. I want to just really shout out all of those on the ground because you are there in the day to day in your communities and making sure that democracy, even in these challenging times, remain accessible, that you have your polling places available for folks who want to vote that way, that you have your ballots arrive by mail, and that you, if you have them, that your drop boxes are safe and secure. And you are the ones making that possible for your community. And what's more impactful than that? Being in the community, providing that accessible democracy, and that we're just there to help you do that and succeed.
Amazing, amazing, and excellent. Let's all go around one more time and say a nice thing about Bonnie. That's our last note in the Q&A. We'll spare you that, Bonnie, but I do want to thank everybody for taking the time, either both panelists and participants. We really appreciate being able to have these conversations, being able to be in community with all of you. If anybody has any questions, I encourage you to reach out to support@readyfortuesday.com. I will share contact information and affiliations with anybody or for those who are willing to do so in the follow-up email. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you for the next conversation. Bye, everybody.